Hello and welcome back to The Fall of the Roman Empire. It's Nick Holmes and this is episode 97 called The Big Break. In this episode, we'll hear how a civil war between the Persians allowed the Emperor Maurice to back the winner and establish a genuine peace between the two superpowers of late antiquity. It was an unexpected gift which could have changed the course of history. So, let's pick up from our last episode when Maurice took over as emperor in August 582 from Tiberius II, who died young and mysteriously, possibly from poisoning. Once he was emperor, Maurice handed over command of the Eastern Army to John Mysticon, or John the Mustachioed, and there was small-scale fighting in what is now southeast Turkey around the Tigris and Batman rivers, as the Romans and Persians fought to dominate this area, which had come under Roman control in Maurice's first campaign back in 578. At that time, Maurice had captured the strategic fortress of Aphum, and the fighting from 582 to 585 was essentially over control of this strongpoint. The reason the fighting was on a small scale was that both Rome and Persia were fighting on other fronts. At this point, the Persians were more concerned about the Turks in the east, and the Romans were also fighting the Slavs and Avars on the Danube front. Indeed, they really had four fronts, if you include the Lombards in Italy and the Berbers in North Africa. Now, in 584, the Persians wanted peace with Rome to concentrate on the Turks in the east, and the Shah Hormizd started negotiations with Maurice. But these came to nothing when Maurice insisted on concessions which Hormizd wasn't willing to make. Indeed, Maurice decided to strike at the Persians while they were distracted by the Turks. He replaced John Mysticon with his brother-in-law Philippicus and launched a major offensive, hoping to win a decisive victory in the east so he could move troops west, where he was paying the Avars 80,000 solidi a year to stay out of Roman territory. It was the only way of dealing with the problem of overextension which the Emperor Justinian had bequeathed his successors. So in 586, Philippicus gathered the Eastern Roman army and marched to Amida in the eastern corner of what is now modern Turkey, ready to advance down the Tigris into Persian territory. A Persian general, referred to as the Kadaragan, an honorific title meaning Black Hawk, responded by meeting the Romans in the plain of Solochon, where the first major battle took place since Constantina in 581. It was fought on a Sunday, and the Bishop of Amida brought out a holy relic to boost the morale of the Roman troops. Rather more helpfully, the Persians brought a camel train of water. A hard-fought conflict ensued. We have no details about the tactics involved, but the Romans won a decisive victory. The Persians were routed and fled in panic to Dara, where the Persian garrison wouldn't open the gates. Stranded outside the city walls, more than 1,000 Persians were taken prisoner, and Theophylact tells us some thirsty fugitives drank themselves to death at village wells. However, Philippicus failed to take advantage of his victory. The Kadaragan proved gifted in defensive warfare, occupying hilltops and preventing the Romans from taking any of the fortified towns in the area. In the winter of 587-8, the fighting died down and Philippicus, who was ill, retired to Constantinople, leaving a new general in charge of the army. This was Heraclius, the father of the same Heraclius, who would later become emperor and one of the late Roman Empire's greatest generals. But Heraclius couldn't stop a disaster from happening, for in Easter 588 the Roman army in the east mutinied when its pay was cut. A lack of money was the bane of Maurice's reign, and in 588 in Constantinople the coffers were empty, and a 5-year donative to the army was due. Donatives had become common back in the crisis of the 3rd century as a way of ensuring the army's loyalty during the many civil wars, and were now expected as a normal payment every few years. Our main chronicler Theophylact says Maurice reduced military pay by a quarter to offset the impending cost of the donative. Another source says Maurice tried to sweeten this by offering to supply the troops with their weapons and armour instead of making them pay for them, and also improving the conditions of service, although what these improvements were exactly remains unclear. But this didn't satisfy the troops, who appointed their own commander, Germanus, to represent them in negotiations with the emperor. Quite what happened next is not clear from our sources, which are limited and often contradictory, but suffice to say, somehow Maurice seems to have found the money to pay the army, and the situation was restored. Although the city of Martyropolis was surrendered to the Persians, this doesn't seem to have been a major blow, and the army recovered its morale and was eager for battle with the Persians. Maurice had survived one mutiny, but, as we'll discover in the next episode, there were more to come, and they would be far more problematic. Let's switch to the Persian side of the story, where a general called Bahram is about to take centre stage. He was a highly experienced Persian soldier from an aristocratic background. In 588, he achieved fame by leading a Persian army of 12,000 elite horsemen to confront a devastating Turkish invasion of Persia's eastern province of Khorasan, which is situated in parts of modern Iran and Afghanistan, where they'd captured the cities of Balkh and Herat. Bahram had beaten the steppe nomads by using steppe nomad tactics, such as ambushing the Turks, so successfully that he'd even captured the Turkish Khagan's golden throne. And in a subsequent encounter, legend says he killed the Turkish Khagan himself with a shot from his bow, although I doubt there was much truth in that. But it was evidence of a growing legend around Bahram's success, the main effect of which was to make the Persian Shah Hormizd feel increasingly nervous. He was already on the receiving end of abuse from the Persian nobility for his failure to defeat the Romans, and now Bahram's victories made him increasingly worried about a coup. He ordered Bahram to switch his troops from the east and counter a Roman invasion of an area the Romans called Albania, which was actually in the Caucasus and today can be found in Azerbaijan and should not be confused with modern Albania, which is in Europe and over 1,000 miles to the west. The Roman army was led by a general called Romanus, who seems to have been very capable. Bahram hoped to lure him into a trap by using the same steppe nomad hit-and-run tactics that had brought him victory against the Turks. But Theophylact tells us Romanus forced him into a pitched battle where the Persians were put to flight by the power of the Roman cavalry charge. Hormizd unwisely saw this as an opportunity to humiliate his popular general and sent him women's clothes and called him a coward. As Theophylact tells us, quote, "When Hormizd learned of this defeat, he did not tolerate the niceties of misfortunes and abused Bahram with the most shameful insults by allotting him female attire as a prize for this ignominy." End quote. This trading of misogynistic insults continued when Bahram told Hormizd he must be the daughter of the great Khosroes, not his son. Bahram did a good job of securing the personal loyalty of the troops under his command by spreading rumours that Hormizd wanted to punish them for their recent defeat. The large garrison at the key Persian stronghold of Nisibis voted to join his rebellion, pushing the dial strongly in his favour. Hormizd gathered all those troops who hadn't declared for Bahram. However, even their loyalty was suspect, as shown when Hormizd's general Farrukhan, leading a regiment of soldiers to confront Bahram, was murdered by his own men, who then switched sides. The bottom line was that the Persian nobility had lost confidence in Hormizd, and before Bahram even marched on Ctesiphon to depose him, he was deposed by his own court as he rushed to Ctesiphon from his summer palace on the Iranian plateau. Theophylact has left us with a gruesome description of what happened next. In a mock trial, Hormizd was called on to justify his actions. He gave a long speech in which he praised his own endeavours. When he'd finished, the nobles jeered him and dragged out his eldest son, who they cut to pieces in front of him. His unfortunate wife was next. As for Hormizd, he was blinded, quote, after they'd heated iron needles to glowing point, they thrust them into the pupils of his eyes, end quote. We have no records about the son who Theophylact says was killed, but we certainly know about Hormizd's eldest son, Khosroes, the future Khosroes II, and the last great ruler of the Sasanian Persians. Quite what his relationship with his father was like has never been clear, but we know he'd escaped prior to his father's capture, and even though they'd deposed his father, the Persian nobles were well disposed towards his son, and now entreated him to become Shah, in defiance of Bahram, who was advancing on the Persian capital. Theophylact says Khosroes effectively killed his own father by sending him little delicacies from his table, with soothing words that life could be worse, whereupon his father would burst into fits of anger denouncing his son. The result was Hormizd was beaten to death. But Theophylact was writing this during the Great War between Heraclius and Khosroes, a decade after these events happened, and was heavily biased against him. Whatever Khosroes' true feelings about his father, he was still in hot water, since the rebellious Bahram was still being rebellious and marching straight for Ctesiphon. Khosroes tried to negotiate with Bahram, but this came to nothing. He raised what troops he could, but Bahram was in control of most of the Persian army. Outside Ctesiphon, Khosroes prepared to meet him in battle. After some initial skirmishing, Khosroes saw his position was hopeless and fled. One story says he only escaped Bahram's soldiers when his uncle Vindo put on royal robes, pretended to be him, and allowed himself to be captured. Where did Khosroes flee to? Some of our sources say he was tempted to go to the Turks, but most say he only had one destination in mind, the Roman Empire. He made it to the Roman border town of Circassium. Meanwhile, Bahram crowned himself Shah, Bahram IV, on the 9th of March, 590. Back in Constantinople, Maurice heard of Khosroes' arrival from Probus, the governor of Circassium. Khosroes begged the emperor for help, even offering to convert to Christianity if that would help. Suddenly, Maurice was in an unexpectedly powerful position. It wasn't just Khosroes who needed his help, but Bahram also bid for his support by offering to surrender Nisibis. Theophylact says Khosroes' interest in Christianity was one of the main reasons Maurice decided to back him. Another was news Khosroes' uncle Vindo had escaped and was raising the standard for Khosroes in Azerbaijan, so at least there was some popular support for him. Late in 590, Maurice declared he would support Khosroes and give him military assistance to recover the throne. Bahram's appeal also started to fade. The Persian nobles, always mindful of the prestige of legitimacy, wondered if they'd made a mistake and might be better off with Khosroes, since Bahram was said to be behaving like an upstart. Khosroes appealed to the garrisons at Martyropolis and Dara to join him. In a vote of confidence for the deposed Shah, both agreed, and Dara was returned to the Romans. At another location called Anathon, the garrison sent the head of their commander who'd supported Bahram to Khosroes, pledging their loyalty to the true Shah. It was at this point, our sources say, Khosroes came very close to converting to Christianity. Apparently he'd been praying to the Christian God, and he believed his prayers were being answered when Maurice backed him and popular opinion in Persia began to move in his favour. This excited the Patriarch Gregory, who rushed to Antioch to receive the exiled Shah into his flock. But unfortunately for Gregory, Khosroes never converted to Christianity, although when he was reinstated and subsequently throughout his long reign, he was conspicuously respectful towards the Persian Christians, even when he was at war with Heraclius. It remains one of the great what might have beens in history had he truly converted to Christianity. To return to our narrative, in the summer of 591, a large Roman army led by Narses, together with Persian detachments sympathetic to Khosroes, and with Khosroes in overall command, moved towards the Tigris. Its aim was to link up with another Romano-Persian army in Armenia, comprising the Roman units there and the Persian forces that had joined Khosroes' uncle Vindo. Bahram stopped the two armies from joining by seizing the bridges that lay between them in the foothills of the Zagros Mountains in Armenia. He tried to intercept the Roman army in Armenia near Lake Urmia, but it evaded him, and he was forced to manoeuvre between the two armies, which joined forces at the river Blarathos. There, Khosroes' combined Roman and Persian armies greatly outnumbered Bahram. Maurice had committed the bulk of the Roman army to support Khosroes, and maybe 50,000 Roman soldiers were there. In a pitched battle, Bahram was heavily outnumbered and defeated. He just escaped capture and fled east to join his former enemies, the Turks. Khosroes was reinstated as Shah in 591. He kept to his agreement to restore significant territories to Maurice, including Martyropolis and Dara, both of which had been recaptured during the campaign to reinstate him. In addition, he ceded Persian-controlled Armenia to Maurice, a sizable chunk of territory, which took the Roman border the furthest east it had ever been, and constituted the largest acquisition of territory since Justinian's reign. For the rest of Maurice's reign, there was peace with Persia, troubled only by one minor incident involving the Arab tribes. It was a tremendous success for Maurice, and as we'll hear in the next episode, it allowed him to switch his army to the troubled Danube front. The story of the Civil War and the new relationship between Rome and Persia was the stuff of make-believe, and one of the most fascinating aspects was the possibility of Khosroes' conversion to Christianity. John of Ephesus wrote that Khosroes' admiration for Christianity was sincere. It's worth quoting the passage in which he said this. Khosroes was a prudent and wise man, and all his lifetime he assiduously devoted himself to the perusal of philosophical works, and, as was said, he took pains to collect the religious books of all creeds, and read and studied them, that he might learn which were true and wise, and which were foolish. He praised the books of the Christians above all others, and said, "These are true and wise above those of any other religion." End quote. As we'll discover in the next episode, the tragedy for both Rome and Persia was that this newfound peace did not last. Within not much more than a decade, the two embarked on a war of mutual destruction. It was so savage that it undermined both of them and would leave them vulnerable to the rise of a new enemy, the Arabs. Indeed, almost all historians agree the sudden and spectacular rise of Islam probably would not have happened had Maurice's peace been maintained. And within that peace, one particularly intriguing aspect stands out above all others. What would have happened had Khosroes converted to Christianity? Perhaps that would have been sufficient for Roman Persia to end their perennial and mutually destructive war. And if that had happened, would the rise of Islam have taken place? Perhaps the entire history of late antiquity would have taken a different course. It's one of the great what-ifs in history. But, as with all what-ifs, we can only speculate on the mystery of what might have been. And that ends this episode. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. The next episode will be in 2 weeks' time on the 2nd of November. And if you like the podcast, please do leave a review and recommend it to a friend. That would be great. The podcast is entirely free and requires no subscription. And of course, do also check out my website, nickholmesauthor.com. Link in the show notes to find maps, blogs, and a free ebook. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.